Betrayal doesn't come as a thunderclap. It seeps in like a draft through a cracked window. You don't notice it until the room is already cold. By the time you do, the damage is done. My name is Richard Coleman, and I'm 68 years old. I've lived long enough to bury my parents, my only brother, and my wife of 40 years. I thought I had made peace with the fact that life strips you down piece by piece. What I hadn't expected was that the deepest cut would come not from strangers or the grave, but from within my own family. I'm a retired construction foreman, spent decades building other people's homes while pouring sweat and savings into my own. Every beam and brick of my house carried a story. My late wife, Margaret, picked the colors and the curtains. I dug the garden beds with my bare hands. When we paid off the mortgage, I remember standing in the driveway, keys in my palm, thinking, "This is ours. No one can take it from us now." Life after Margaret was quieter, lonelier. My son, Michael, visited often, and when he married Amanda, I tried to welcome her with the kind of open heart Margaret would have wanted. I told myself it would be good to have youth and laughter back in the house. I even gave them the upstairs suite while I moved into the smaller ground-floor den. I wanted them to feel comfortable, to feel at home. But comfort has a way of turning into entitlement. At first, it was the little things. Amanda changing furniture without asking, rolling her eyes when I watched the evening news, hosting her parents for long weekends without checking with me. I bit my tongue, telling myself she was young, spirited, still adjusting. Margaret used to remind me, "Patience, Richard. Love makes room for mistakes, so I gave Amanda room, more than I should have." The turning point came one Saturday evening after dinner. We'd finished the pot roast, and Michael had gone to the store for dessert. Amanda stayed behind at the table, swirling her wine like she owned the place. She leaned back, smiled that sharp little smile of hers, and said, "You do know you're just a guest here now, right?" The words hit harder than I expected. Guest. In the home I built. In the house where I carried Margaret over the threshold, where I raised Michael, where I planned to take my last breath. I didn't argue. I didn't throw my glass or slam my fist like some men might have. I just stared at her for a long moment, let the silence speak for me, then stood up and left the keys on the counter. If she thought I was a guest, then let her live with the weight of the keys. Let her wonder what that meant. That night I drove aimlessly, the road humming under my tires, my mind replaying her smirk over and over. Anger burned, but beneath it was something colder. The realization that Amanda didn't see me as family, not even as a person with a lifetime stake in this house. To her, I was an obstacle, a piece of furniture she couldn't wait to move out. By the time I pulled back into the driveway hours later, the lights upstairs were off. The house looked different somehow, like it was already slipping from my hands. That was the first time I understood that betrayal had taken root. And once it takes root, it doesn't stop growing. The thing about Amanda was that she didn't start off as the villain. When Michael first brought her around, she was polite, even charming. Margaret would have liked her at first glance. Bright eyes, a quick wit, the kind of confidence that made people lean in when she spoke. I mistook it for strength. In hindsight, I think it was just calculation. Michael was smitten. My boy has always been steady, a little too gentle for his own good. He fell for her energy, her ambition, the way she carried herself like life owed her more than she already had. I told myself she'd balance him out. He needed fire. He needed someone who'd push him. Their wedding was small, but beautiful. Margaret had already been gone a few years, and standing alone in the pew as Michael said his vows left me hollow in ways I couldn't explain. When Amanda smiled at me afterward, slipping her arm through mine for photographs, I let myself believe she'd be part of my healing, that she'd become family, real family. At first, she played the role well enough. Brought me coffee in the mornings, asked questions about my work stories, laughed at my old jokes. I wanted so badly to believe she respected me. But little cracks appeared quicker than I expected. She criticized the curtains Margaret had chosen, said they made the house feel stuck in the 70s. She complained about the creak of the staircase, the chipped tiles in the kitchen. "Michael, we could do so much better if we modernized," she'd say, her hand sliding over his. Each comment was small, but together they added up to a picture. She didn't see my home as something to respect. She saw it as something to claim. I brushed it off, telling myself she was just adjusting. After all, I had invited them to live here rent-free. It seemed petty to argue over paint colors or furniture arrangements, but the problem wasn't the changes, it was the way she made them. As if my voice didn't matter, as if my years in the house, my memories, had no weight compared to her Pinterest boards and her parents' advice. Her parents became a fixture soon enough. They lived across town, but it felt like they spent more weekends under my roof than in their own home. They were polite enough, but polite in that strained way that barely hid judgment. Her father would glance around my living room with the kind of look a buyer gives a fixer-upper. Her mother always suggested improvements, a bigger kitchen, an open floor plan, tearing down the old shed in the yard. One Sunday afternoon, I came in from pruning the rose bushes to find Amanda and her parents sitting at the dining table with house blueprints spread out like they were already in charge of renovations. My stomach tightened. I asked what they were planning. Amanda just smiled and said, "Future possibilities." It was then I began to see the shape of the betrayal. They weren't just living in my house. They were circling it. The first real confrontation happened about a year into their stay. I'd been in the den watching the ball game when Amanda walked in without knocking. She folded her arms and said, "Richard, don't you think it's time you downsized? This house is way too much for you." I muted the TV and looked at her. "Amanda, this house isn't too much for me. It's my home." She rolled her eyes. "You've got a hole upstairs you don't even use. Michael and I could really make something of this place if you weren't clinging to it like some relic." The word relic stung more than I let on. I felt my face flush, but I kept my voice calm. "I've worked my whole life for this house. Your husband grew up here. Every board, every nail has a story. That's not something you throw away because you want an open floor plan." For a moment, I thought she'd back down. Instead, she smirked. "Stories don't pay the bills. You should be grateful you even get to stay here." Grateful. That word lodged deep, sharp as a splinter. She wanted me to see myself as a tenant in my own home. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't kick her out of the room. But something inside me shifted. For the first time, I saw Amanda not as a difficult daughter-in-law, but as a threat, someone who wanted to erase me. That night I sat alone in the den, looking at the photographs of Margaret on the mantel. Her smile in those old frames steadied me. I whispered to her picture, "Don't worry, Maggie. I won't let them take this from us." And in that quiet vow, the battle line was drawn. The weeks that followed were a strange balancing act. On the surface, life went on as usual. Michael worked long hours at the insurance office. Amanda floated between part-time jobs and consulting projects that never seemed to bring in steady income. Her parents visited often, lingering at the table long after dinner, sipping wine and making little comments about potential and future investments. I tried to ignore it. I busied myself with the yard, the repairs, the daily rhythms of an old man determined to keep his house in order. But no matter how much I trimmed, fixed, or polished, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being edged out of my own life. That feeling crystallized one Thursday afternoon. I'd come home from the hardware store with a box of nails when I heard voices upstairs. Amanda, her father, and her mother, speaking in low tones, urgent, almost conspiratorial. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the house carried sound, and when I set the box down quietly in the den, their words drifted through the old vents like poison. Her mother: "Once Richard finally moves out, you and Michael can refinance. Use the equity to buy something bigger." Amanda: "Exactly. He can't live here forever. We'll make him see reason." Her father: "And if he refuses? Houses can't sit in limbo. Sooner or later something will give. You just need to stay firm." There was a pause, then Amanda's voice, cool and sharp: "Don't worry. I'm not letting some old man keep me from building the life I deserve." The box of nails slipped from my hand, clattering against the floorboards. The sound carried, and suddenly the voices upstairs hushed. I bent down, collecting the nails one by one, my hands trembling. The truth lay bare now. Amanda wasn't just thoughtless or selfish. She had a plan, and it was rooted in carving me out of my own home. Later that evening, Michael sat across from me at dinner, oblivious. He asked about the ball game, about the tomatoes in the garden. I studied his face, kind, trusting, the same boy I once carried on my shoulders at the county fair, and I wondered how much he knew. Was he complicit, or just blinded by love? I tested the waters. "Michael, you and Amanda seem to be planning a lot with her parents lately." He looked up, startled. "Planning? No, Dad. We're just talking. They give her advice, that's all advice." That word rang hollow. His fork scraped his plate as he spoke, his eyes darting away. Maybe he believed it. Maybe he wanted to. Either way, it was clear he wasn't ready to hear the truth. That night, I sat in the den long after everyone had gone upstairs. The house creaked with its usual sounds, but they felt different, like whispers of betrayal in every groan of wood. I stared at the mantel again, at Margaret's smiling face, and I felt the heat rise in my chest. I could have confronted Amanda right then, called her down, demanded answers. But years of work, of leading crews and managing projects, had taught me something valuable. Timing matters. A hammer swung too soon misses the nail. Better to wait, to plan, to let the board line up. Still, patience didn't erase the sting. The next week I caught Amanda in the kitchen, her parents again at the table. This time they had a notepad, figures scrawled across the page. I stepped in quietly, poured myself a glass of water, and watched them stiffen. "What's all this?" I asked. Amanda didn't miss a beat. "Budgeting." Her mother folded the notepad closed a little too quickly. Her father cleared his throat. "Young couples have to think ahead." I nodded slowly, sipping my water. "Thinking ahead is wise. But just so we're clear, this house isn't on the market. Not now. Not ever. While I'm alive." Amanda's eyes flickered, her jaw tightening. "Of course, Richard," she said sweetly. Too sweetly. That was the moment I saw it in her face. She wasn't planning to wait for me to die. She wanted me out. She wanted control. The weight of it settled heavy on my chest. This wasn't just family tension anymore. It was war. Quiet, polite, unspoken, but war all the same. That night, lying in bed, I realized something that both chilled and steadied me. Amanda thought she had the upper hand. She believed I was just an aging man clinging to a house too big for him. She didn't know what I still had tucked away. The deed in my name, the savings, the old connections. She thought I was cornered, but she was wrong. And that thought, that small ember of truth, began to glow. I didn't sleep much after that night. My mind ran through every conversation, every sideways glance, every careless remark Amanda had tossed out over the past year. The puzzle was complete now. She wanted the house, the equity, the security. I wasn't a father-in-law in her eyes. I was an obstacle in her way. But here's the thing about obstacles. Sometimes they're made of stone and sometimes of steel. At 68 I might have slowed, but I was still steel. The very next morning I pulled down an old box from the den closet. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in years. Margaret's will, the original mortgage papers, and the deed to the house, still solely in my name. Margaret had insisted it stay that way after she passed, worried that Michael might someday be pressured into signing things he didn't fully understand. At the time, I thought it unnecessary. Now I saw her wisdom. Amanda and her parents could circle all they wanted. Without my signature, nothing moved, nothing changed. That realization steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. I made a quiet appointment with an old friend, Charles Whitman, a lawyer I'd known since our kids were in Little League. He had gone gray and slower in gait, but his mind was as sharp as ever. Over coffee at his office, I laid everything out. Amanda's words, the conversations I'd overheard, the blueprints on the table. Charles listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he nodded once. "Richard, you still hold the cards. The deed is yours. No transfer, no refinance, no sale can happen without you. They can scheme all they like, but legally, you're immovable." That word, immovable, lit a spark in me. For weeks I'd felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. Now I realized I was the ground. Still, Charles warned me, don't underestimate them. Entitlement can make people reckless. They'll try to corner you emotionally. They'll use Michael against you. You need to be ready. I left his office with a plan forming. Patience was no longer enough. I would prepare. I would strike back, not with shouting matches, but with strategy. Back at the house, I moved carefully, quietly. I started reviewing my finances, consolidating accounts, even contacting an auctioneer I'd worked with years ago when I sold some farmland. We spoke about possibilities, not commitments yet, but ideas. The thought of it alone brought a calm smile to my face. Amanda thought the house was her prize, but she had no idea how quickly the board could flip. Of course, I didn't let any of this show. To Amanda, I remained the same tired old man who spent afternoons pruning roses and evenings with the news. I even tolerated her parents' visits with polite nods, never revealing that I now held the ace they didn't even know was in play. The first test came sooner than I expected. A Saturday morning, Amanda caught me in the kitchen, her parents already settled with coffee. She leaned against the counter, casual as you please, and said, "Richard, Michael and I have been talking. It really doesn't make sense for you to keep rattling around in this house. Maybe you'd be happier in a retirement community? You'd have company, activities. You wouldn't be so alone." Her parents nodded along, like actors in a well-rehearsed play. I sipped my coffee, studying them one by one. Then I said very calmly, "Interesting idea, but you seem to forget one thing. This is my house, not Michael's, not yours, mine. And I'll decide when and if I leave it." The room went still. Amanda's smile faltered for the first time, just for a flicker, before she recovered. "Of course, Richard," she said too quickly, but I'd seen it, the crack in her confidence. Later that day, I walked the perimeter of the property, the autumn air crisp against my skin. I ran my hand along the wooden fence I'd built decades ago, felt the grain beneath my fingers. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't let anyone take what we built, Richard." I whispered back, "I won't." For the first time since Amanda had smirked and called me a guest, I felt something more than anger. I felt resolve. Amanda believed she was tightening the noose. She didn't know I was already sawing through the rope. If Amanda had been circling before, now she began circling with teeth bared. Every day brought some new jab, some new push against the walls I had built. She didn't bother to mask her impatience any more. It started with little remarks, said in that syrupy, sweet tone that carried poison underneath. "You know, Richard, it must be exhausting keeping up this place on your own. Michael and I could manage things so much better if you'd just relax. Don't you think Margaret would want you somewhere safe instead of clinging to an empty house?" Each time I bit back the anger. I'd learned long ago that shouting only gives your opponent what they want, evidence of weakness. So I kept my answers clipped, polite, never giving her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. But she escalated. One evening I came into the kitchen to find Amanda rearranging the pantry, tossing out jars of preserves Margaret had canned years ago. My chest tightened at the sight of them in the trash. "What are you doing?" I asked. She shrugged. "They're old. Clutter. This house needs a clean slate, Richard." Just like you do, I bent down, pulled the jars from the garbage, and set them back on the shelf. My voice was steady, but steel ran beneath it. "You don't throw away what you don't understand." For the first time, anger flashed across her face, unhidden. "You're impossible," she snapped. "Michael and I are trying to build a future here, and you're standing in the way. You act like this house belongs to your ghost of a wife, not the living family in it." I stood tall, meeting her glare. "Margaret built this house with me, Amanda. Her ghost has more claim here than you ever will." Her lips curled, but before she could retort, Michael walked in, tired from work, oblivious to the storm brewing in his own kitchen. He kissed Amanda on the cheek, asked what was for dinner, and the moment dissolved into silence. Still, the battle lines had sharpened. A week later, the confrontation finally snapped. It was after dinner, Michael upstairs on a call, Amanda's parents lingering with coffee. Amanda turned to me across the table and said too casually, "Richard, it's time. You can't keep pretending this house is yours forever. You're a guest here. Start acting like it." The words landed heavy, but I had been waiting for them. Amanda thought this was the moment she had cornered me, that she'd broken my defenses. Instead, I smiled faintly. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the old brass keys, and set them on the counter with a soft clink. "You're right," I said quietly. "Guests don't hold keys." Her eyes lit with triumph, her parents leaning forward like vultures ready to feast. She thought she had won. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd already met with Charles, already spoken with the auctioneer, already lined up every piece I needed for the counterstrike. I walked out without another word, leaving the keys behind. Driving into the night, I felt the strangest calm. For the first time in months, my chest wasn't tight, my jaw wasn't clenched. They thought they had taken something from me, but in truth, I had just baited the trap. As the road stretched ahead, headlights cutting through the dark, I could almost hear Margaret's laughter beside me. That quiet, knowing laugh she had whenever I pulled off one of my quiet victories at work. "Don't worry, Maggie," I whispered. "They think I'm beaten, but I'm just getting started." 2 days passed after I left those keys on the counter. 2 days of silence from Michael, from Amanda, from her parents. I spent those hours not in defeat, but in preparation. Signing papers with Charles, confirming arrangements with the auctioneer, and ensuring every line of ink sealed my authority beyond question. By the 3rd day, I was ready. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked almost smug under the autumn sun, as though Amanda's presence had already stamped it hers. The curtains, ones she had chosen, fluttered in the upstairs window. I noticed 2 extra cars in the drive. Her parents, of course. They were always nearby when the scent of spoils lingered. But I wasn't alone either. A second vehicle followed me up the gravel, a dark sedan. From it stepped Daniel Foster, the man who had just purchased a long-term lease on my property at the auction house. Mid-50s, firm handshake, the kind of steady presence you don't mistake. I'd chosen him carefully, a man who respected boundaries, who wanted stability for his family, not a quick flip. Amanda opened the door as we approached, her smile already spreading, the keys glinting in her hand like a trophy she couldn't wait to wave in my face. "Richard," she said sweetly, "decided to come back and visit?" I stepped aside, letting Daniel move forward. "Not just a visit. Amanda, meet Mr. Foster. He's the new tenant." The words landed like stones dropped in water, the ripples visible in the widening of her eyes, the stiffening of her smile. Her father appeared behind her, brow furrowed. "Tenant?" Daniel offered his hand. "I won the auction," Richard held. "Pleasure to meet you. I'll just need you to sign these rental papers so we can finalize the arrangement." He pulled out a folder, crisp documents inside. Amanda's mother paled. Amanda herself blinked hard, as though trying to process a language she didn't speak. "Auction?" she repeated, voice rising. "What auction?" I kept my tone calm, almost gentle. "The one you never thought I'd have the foresight to arrange. I've leased the property. From this day forward, Daniel here and his family are the rightful occupants of the upper suite and common areas. You, Amanda, and your parents are no longer the ones holding sway here." The silence that followed was delicious. Her parents exchanged glances, the kind that spoke of schemes unraveling, of castles built on sand. Amanda's face twisted, the mask slipping. "You can't just— This is our house?" I met her eyes, steady and unflinching. "No, Amanda. It's my house, always has been. And now, legally bound, it's a house that will answer to me and those I choose to lease it to. You said I was just a guest here. Today I've made you one." Daniel set the papers on the kitchen table, pen poised. "Signatures, please. Standard procedure." Her parents froze, hands hovering but unwilling to touch the documents. Their silence was louder than any argument they could have made. For the first time since this ordeal began, they had no script, no leverage. Just the realization that the old man they thought finished had outmaneuvered them completely. Amanda sputtered, turning to Michael, who had just come down the stairs, confusion etched on his face. "Michael, tell him. Tell your father he can't do this." But Michael looked at me, then at Amanda, then at the papers. His lips parted, but no words came. He wasn't a conspirator, I realized then, just a man too weak to stand between fire and steel. Amanda's voice cracked into a shrill note. "You'll regret this, Richard. You've ruined everything." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "No, Amanda. I've protected everything. That's the difference between us." Her eyes burned with fury, but there was no comeback, only silence. The trap had closed. The house had never felt so still. Daniel waited patiently by the table, the rental papers spread like a verdict waiting to be signed. Amanda's parents hovered behind her, pale and stiff, as though hoping silence might make the moment vanish. But Amanda wasn't built for silence. Her voice rose sharp and jagged. "You can't just hand our home to some stranger. Michael, say something." Michael stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, eyes flicking between us. I could see the boy he once was, torn, timid, unable to step into the storm. His silence was answer enough. Amanda slammed her hand against the table, rattling the pen Daniel had set down. "This is insane. You're spiteful, Richard. That's all this is. You'd rather ruin your family than let us move forward." I stayed seated, calm. My voice was low, steady, the way I used to speak to crews when tempers flared on a job site. "No, Amanda. I'd rather protect my family's legacy than hand it over to someone who sees it as a stepping stone. You mistook kindness for weakness. That was your mistake." Her father cleared his throat, half-hearted. "Maybe we should just talk this through, Richard." "No need for hasty decisions." I turned to him, letting a little steel into my gaze. "Hasty? I've been patient for over a year. I listened while your daughter dismissed me, insulted my wife's memory, and schemed under my own roof. I'm done listening." Amanda's face twisted, her composure cracking in front of everyone. "You're pathetic. An old man clinging to bricks and ghosts. You don't matter anymore." The words might have cut once. Now they only confirmed everything I already knew. I stood, slowly, so she had to look up at me. "I mattered enough to build this house. I mattered enough to raise Michael. And I matter enough, even now, to decide who stays here and who leaves. That hasn't changed. That will never change." For a long moment, no one spoke. Amanda's breathing came fast and shallow, her chest heaving with fury she couldn't channel into power any more. Michael stepped forward then, voice quiet, almost pleading. "Amanda, maybe we should just sign. Maybe it's better this way." Her head whipped toward him, betrayal in her eyes. "You're siding with him? After everything?" Michael's shoulders slumped. "I'm not siding with anyone. I can't fight this." His voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time I pitied him. My son, trapped between a father who had finally drawn a line and a wife who had built her castle on sand. Amanda's parents exchanged a glance, then sank into chairs like puppets whose strings had been cut. Her father finally picked up the pen with a heavy sigh. "We'll sign." Amanda's voice shrieked, raw and desperate. "Don't you dare!" But it was too late. One by one the signatures scratched across the page. The sound of ink on paper was the sound of chains breaking. Theirs, not mine. Daniel collected the documents with professional efficiency, slipping them back into his folder. He shook my hand firmly. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Coleman. I'll move my family in next month." Amanda's fury collapsed into silence. She turned her eyes on me, and for the first time I saw not triumph or arrogance, but something else entirely. Fear. I leaned close enough that only she could hear. "You told me I was just a guest here. Now you're the guest." Remember that her lips parted, but no words came. For once she had nothing left to wield. As Daniel left, the house seemed to exhale. The weight that had pressed on me for months lifted, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. I wasn't just surviving Amanda's schemes anymore, I had ended them. And as I stood in the doorway, watching her parents gather their coats in silence and Michael retreat to the shadows of the hallway, I knew the war was over. The victory was mine. The house was quiet after they left. Amanda upstairs, sulking behind closed doors. Michael pacing softly in the hall, his steps heavy with shame. Her parents had slipped out without a word, the echo of their silence louder than any argument they could have made. I sat alone in the den, the evening sun pouring through the curtains Margaret had chosen so many years ago, the ones Amanda once mocked. The light touched her photograph on the mantel, her smile still steady, still sure. For the first time in months, I felt at peace, sitting in that chair. The war was finished, not in explosions or shouting, but in signatures and silence. That was always the truth of real battles. Victory isn't loud. It's the absence of your enemy's voice when they finally run out of ground to stand on. I thought of Amanda's words. "You're just a guest here." How easily she had dismissed me, reduced me to nothing in the home I had built with my hands, my years, my love. And yet here I sat, not as a guest, but as the master still. She was the one reduced to silence, a tenant on terms she never imagined. Michael came into the den after a while, his face tired. He stood there awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. "Dad," he said finally, I didn't know it would get this far." I studied him, the boy I had raised, now a man caught between loyalties. My voice softened. "I know, son. You wanted peace. But peace without respect is just surrender." Don't forget that he nodded, his throat working, but said nothing more. There was nothing left to say. As the night fell, I walked the house, touching the familiar walls, the staircase, the kitchen counter where Margaret once kneaded bread. Each step reminded me of what was at stake, not just bricks and wood, but a lifetime. Amanda had tried to erase me, to write herself into a legacy she never earned, but in the end she'd been written out instead. I didn't feel triumphant, not in the way young men might. Victory at my age carries no banners or parades. It is quieter, steadier. The simple knowledge that what you love endures because you refuse to let it be stolen. In bed that night, I lay with the window cracked, the autumn air cool against my skin. I thought of Margaret, of how she used to rest her hand on my chest when sleep pulled her under. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, "We did it, Maggie. They didn't take it from us." And in the silence that followed, I felt the house settle around me, not as a battlefield anymore, but as home once again. Betrayal seeps in like a draft, I'd told myself once. But so does justice, quietly, steadily, until the warmth returns and the cold is gone.